everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about how you can end a BDSM scene, because I just got done watching the entire 50 Shades of Grey franchise, and apparently the only way that you can end a scene there is with penetrative vaginal intercourse. And yeah, there's a few more options besides that, so we're going to be talking about what those options are today, because I think even in the BDSM community, outside of that entire franchise, it is a very underappreciated skill to be able to end a scene with grace and be able to bring things to a nice, complete close. So that's what we're going to be discussing today, and as per usual, like with everything else, ending a scene starts with negotiation. Negotiation is the process by which you normally talk about what will actually happen during the scene. Are you going to do a flogging? Is it going to be primarily romantic or sexual or just platonic? It's where you kind of discuss all of those different details. But I think not only should you be discussing what you do in the scene, but also how you end the scene. Because depending on what elements you want to include, there are many different possibilities you might want to consider with how you want the scene to end. So I'm going to go through a list of some of those things that you should be considering. 1. What type of play are you going to be doing? Is it impact play, bondage, pet play? How likely is it that that play will result in subspace? 2. What type of energy are you going for in the scene? Is it going to be primal? Is it going to be tender and caring? Is there going to be fear play? Is it about having a fun time or catharsis? Number 3 is duration. How long do you actually have for this scene? Do you have 10 minutes? Half an hour? Do you have the entire evening to yourselves? Or are you playing at a dungeon where maybe you have a time limit for a particular piece of equipment or an area of dungeon space? Number 4 is setting. Where are you actually doing this play at? Are you at home? Are you going to a private play party? Or, like I already mentioned, will you be going to a public dungeon? Because different options will be available to you depending on what space you're in. Number 5 would be goals. Do you have any particular goals or achievements you want to get to in the scene? Are you working towards getting bruising? Are you trying to get into subspace? Or is your scene more open-ended and you're just trying to have a fun experience? Then, once you've taken the time to evaluate all of these different aspects of the scene, then you can kind of start to decide how you actually want to navigate bringing the scene to a close. And there's lots of different tools you can do to kind of help better understand when the scene should end. Number 1 would be safe words, because if you are using a safe word, then you need to account for the possibility that a safe word could be used in the scene, and that would immediately bring everything to a close. I actually know some people who are more on the edge play side of things that enjoy playing until their partner says their safe word or read. Not everybody uses safe words in that fashion, but that is also a possibility if you really like the boundary pushing and the potential kind of CNC aspects of kink. Number 2 is using roleplay actions or phrases. And I really enjoy this one because it allows you to stay in your role while still bringing the scene to a close without having kind of a harsh jolt back into reality. So for example, if you are doing an interrogation scene, you might have a phrase you tell your partner of ahead of time where you say, when I tell you that your lawyer is on the way from the interrogation, then that means that there's going to be 5 minutes left in the scene. You can also have words and phrases that you use to leave the scene or tell your partner that the scene is going to end that makes sense in context. So maybe you're doing some kind of servant role play where when somebody says, "May I be dismissed to the kitchen," that means that they are ready for the scene to come to a close. Or maybe you tell them, "I'm going to retire to my library," and that means that you as the top or the dominant partner in that scene is ready to bring the scene to a close. So that just allows you a way to communicate without totally breaking the role play aspect, and that can be quite helpful for some people, especially when you get into a really deep headspace. If you're doing something that is nonverbal, or your partner has the potential to go nonverbal, such as with pet play, then it makes more sense to maybe have some kind of action rather than a phrase. So maybe when they go to a certain cage and they lay down their head, maybe that means they're ready for the scene to end. Or maybe they paw at their bed in a certain way. Or maybe you, as the human player in that situation, goes to put your coat on, and that's a sign that the scene is about to end. There's lots of ways you can incorporate this. Number 3 would be task or goal completion. And I really like this one for service-oriented scenes or just anything where you can have a concrete goal to work towards, because that allows you an opportunity to play with exactly how long the scene will last. So maybe you need to shine 3 pairs of boots, or you need to write 10 lines while being spanked, or you need to count all the marbles in a marble jar. And if you're not super strict with the time frame in which those things get done, then that creates an opportunity for the submissive or the bottom to have a little bit of leeway with how long the scene goes on for. If they aren't a big fan of shining shoes, maybe that means they try to get it done as quickly as possible. Or maybe your partner really, really likes being spanked, so they really savor writing that last line and really trying to make that penmanship count. And that can be a little bit of topping from the bottom or bratting sort of energy, especially if somebody's really, really trying to drag it out. So make sure you negotiate that up front if that is something that is a potential possibility. You can also be very concrete and say you expect things to be done promptly, or tell them you want them to take their time. So there is some way to kind of build in expectations of how that in particular is going to be handled. Now, you do want to make sure when you are creating this kind of scene that you keep the task realistic for the time you have on hand. If you only have 20 minutes, don't give your partner something that would probably take 2 hours if you want it to be done well. And the next suggestion is probably one of the clearest cut, easy ways to know how to end a scene, and that is with a time limit. So if you only have 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, then you know that the scene is going to be over when that time is up. And you can keep track of that with a watch or an hourglass or an analog clock, because it can be difficult to just try to keep track of time in your head and say, oh, I think it's been like 5 minutes, because BDSM can absolutely alter time, and you can swear up and down that it's been 20 minutes and it'll really be like 4 hours, and you're like, whoa, where did all that time go? So make sure you have some kind of way of keeping track of that time, but when you do have that in place, it is really, really easy to know exactly when a scene will end. The next method is also really simple. That would just be countdowns. And countdowns can take a couple of different forms. Like, you can negotiate at the beginning of a scene that you're going to play for 50 hits with the paddle or 100 spanks or something like that. You can also incorporate a verbal element into this, where you expect a partner to either count up or count down to a certain number, such as saying 1 sir, 2 sir, 3 sir, each time an actual hit takes place. And that can also be a good way of making sure you're keeping track as the dom or the top with how many hits you've done. And there is some flexibility with this that allows for bratty or particularly masochistic partners to have a little bit of leeway here. So what you can do for brats or hardcore masochists is maybe like towards the end, when there's the last like 5 or 10 hits, maybe that one wasn't hard enough, and so it didn't actually count, and so you have to hit them again. Now, again, that is bratting, and so you do need to negotiate that, but it can be a fun little play on the typical element of a standard countdown. The next way would be with check-ins, and check-ins are my preferred method, especially with more experienced players, because rather than having a super concrete ending in mind, you're checking in with your partner during the scene and seeing how they're doing. You know, are you still doing good? Do you have 2 minutes left in you? Do you have 5 minutes left in this tie? You know, so on and so forth. Just in some way, you're checking in with your partner during the course of the scene just to see how things are going. And then based on your experience as the dom or the top, previous scenes that you've done, you can kind of gauge, okay, I think we have like 5 minutes left, or I'm going to try to go more into a cool down now, or maybe they really want to keep going, or something else. And again, this is a little bit more advanced because it does require more intuition. It also requires that the bottom partner have a better understanding of exactly how long they're able to play for and exactly what their endurance is. One other really simple method for ending a scene is to just end it when the dom or the top gets tired, because hey, doing BDSM can be a really tiring experience, and maybe it's not that you've reached a certain goal, maybe it's not that anybody needs a safe word, but like you're just feeling tired, your wrist is kind of getting worn out, and you really aren't able to bring that same strength in with your punches or with your spankings that you were at the beginning of the scene. And so hey, you know, it's time to quit while you're ahead, and you're going to end the scene because you're starting to feel tired. Now, the last method I'm going to bring up here is called CNC, or consensual non-consent. And with that, you end the scene not necessarily because your partner like says that they're ready to be done and you're checking in with them, or because you've counted to a certain number, but the dom or the top has their prerogative with when the scene gets to be over. It's consensual non-consent, and so the partner has typically given up their ability to safe word, except for maybe in really extreme safety cases where like they're gonna go into anaphylactic shock, something like that, and the dom or the top gets to decide when the scene will end. Now this means the play can end quite abruptly, which can obviously be jarring for people, so keep that in mind. Also, in general, CNC type play isn't great for people who are brand new to BDSM because it is so complicated and hard to do correctly, so keep that in mind. CNC is usually more for experienced players, but I did want to get that possibility out there. Now I want to get into some general advice for ending scenes, which I think is really important. Number one, I would highly recommend avoiding quitting a scene cold turkey, because when you are doing impact play or something that's really emotionally intense, or if somebody gets into a really deep headspace, if you suddenly just end the scene, that can be a really bad experience for someone. That can really recolor the whole rest of the experience based on the fact that suddenly everything was over and there was like this record scratch moment, and what do you mean everything's done and the lights are on? What happened? It can be really uncomfortable for people. So if you are doing a scene, especially like impact play, I recommend incorporating a cool down period when you are slowly kind of ramping down the intensity, or you're slowly bringing everything to an end, like you're trying to kind of pump the brakes on a car, you know, you're trying to slowly and gently bring it to a close, because that can also signal to the bottom that they should kind of be mentally preparing to come back out of the scene when they receive kind of the notice that like, oh, okay, these hits are getting a little bit lighter, I think things are starting to wind down now. And also it's just a good idea in general, even if the scene isn't physical, to have some kind of way of bringing the scene slowly to a close as opposed to crashing. And the cool down is usually when the play gets less intense, you get prepared to go back into the normal everyday environment like I've already discussed. If you are playing in a more sexually focused capacity, usually the cool down period is when you would kind of amp up the sexual tones of the scene and go into more of a sex focus versus a BDSM focus. Now, another thing to keep in mind that I haven't mentioned yet is subspace, or even top space and dom space. When you are playing with BDSM, there is the possibility that somebody could enter into a highly altered mental state known as subspace that can make it quite difficult to communicate with them. They might go completely nonverbal. You might not really be able to contact them super well just because of how deep that headspace is. And I would recommend to bring that up in negotiations, because if you are not prepared for how to handle subspace, especially as like a newer dom where somebody goes into subspace with them for the first time, you could be like, well, what am I supposed to do here? Some people, when they go into subspace, they want the play to stop immediately or slowly bring it to a close, because that usually means for them the scene is kind of coming to an end. Other people are fine playing through their subspace and would want you to keep going. And you want to make sure you talk to your partner about what way they want the scene to be handled. And if somebody goes into subspace unexpectedly, I would recommend to err on the side of caution and bring the scene to a close based on that. Because if you are a dom or a top and it's a newer person, if you don't really know what to do, if you didn't communicate about it, I don't think there should be any shame with ending a scene early because a situation came up that you weren't prepared for, that you didn't talk about. I think the responsible thing is to end that scene rather than keep going and then just keep playing, because you don't really know what that person would prefer you do because you didn't get a chance to talk about it. And finally, after you have decided how the scene will end and you do actually bring it to a close, that is when people would normally go into aftercare. This is the care that you get after a scene. I have done tons of videos explaining more about aftercare if you're curious, but just as a quick little summary, aftercare can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some people like to get food and water. Some people need a blanket or soft clothing. Other people need a nap or want to take a shower. Some people want to go out and go for a walk or spend time by themselves. Some people want to cuddle with their stuffed animals or watch a nice movie or listen to music or decompress by playing video games. There are lots of different ways that you can do aftercare. Everybody has their own particular way of doing it, and different scenes, even for the same person, might mean different aftercare. So make sure you have that as a conversation as well during your negotiations. Aftercare can also include things like taking off any sort of BDSM equipment, like removing bondage or corsetry. It can also mean cleaning up the environment you did the scene in, such as wiping down furniture, for example. It could also mean taking care of any potential broken skin or bruises that might be developing, just to make sure that everybody's going to end the scene in a nice, happy, healthy, and safe manner. Aftercare can also include sex as well, so I want to make sure I bring that up too. Not everybody does their BDSM sexually, so if you want that to be on the table for how a scene will end, make sure you have that conversation with your potential play partner, because that actually requires additional negotiation if you want to have sex be part of your play. And that's everything I wanted to share with you guys today about how to end a BDSM scene. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them down in the comment section below. If you want to see more from me, you can subscribe to my channel. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support my channel, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. A link to that will be down in the description box below. That is what makes all of these videos possible. If you already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.